Well, good morning, everyone. I was struck by Hakujo saying in his talk that session is a journey. And so I've been thinking about how we think about it. And how about calling it even something more than that, an adventure? Uh, I mean, it's a big matter. It's a matter that really concerns me. Some some people's lives are utterly transformed by this practice. And then somehow other people, I wonder what the difference is sometimes. Other people, sure, everyone gets a little bit calmer and improves their lives, but what's the difference with really making kind of the rubber hit the road with our practice? And I mean, after all, we didn't just come here and take on this intense, quite demanding week together to gain stress reduction, right? So um, I'm sometimes amused. I'm sure a lot of you have had this experience of will go back to our everyday life or to our work life or whatever, and people will say, "Oh, where have you been?" "Oh, on a meditation retreat." "Oh, that must have been so relaxing. How lovely. I wish I could have time to do a retreat." And I imagine them picturing the monastics kind of fanning us with palm leaves as we lie out in a field of soft grass, and they're putting cucumber slices over our puffy eyes and massaging our feet. Mui and Corin, I want you to get started on this, okay? I'd like to see a little more of that kind of thing. Uh, so we come to Sesshin and to Zen practice in general for something bigger than that, right? If that's all we're getting, a little bit further calmness. Uh, oh, I don't know. There's probably easier ways to do it, right? so So oftentimes we come to Zen practice because of a promise of some kind of freedom and a sense, we have this sense that there's something lacking in life. And we're not quite satisfied with just kind of running along the ordinary paths offered to us by life. And yet somehow when we're in the middle of a session, in the fourth or fifth afternoon, and our knees are aching and we're trying to stay awake, and it's too hot or it's too cold, or our nose is itching and our mind's wandering, we can lose sight of what it is that brought us in the first place. So, and this has happened to me a lot. I've been practicing for 35 years. I've done many, 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 many retreats. And so I'm very familiar with the phenomena and the temptations that come, particularly when we're deep into a session. There's sometimes we can get lured in by just kind of daydreaming, right? Just kind of coasting along on the cushion, and it's going to come to an end, and you know, we can just let our minds drift and wander. Of course, that's wasting our energy and wasting our time. Sometimes we can just get into gritting our teeth with the discomfort and bringing anything to mind that will deliver us from it. These are all temptations. We can get so tired, and we can just go into this foggy state and just get lost there. So what I'm encouraging us is to remember the adventure. So why is an adventure an adventure? It's not much of an adventure if we just, go to some vacation spot, spend a week on the beach, nothing much happens, and we come back home. What makes an adventure is we're traveling, we're seeing new things, we're meeting exciting new people, we're getting dysentery, we're missing a plane, we're getting sleep deprived, we're eating a wonderful meal. We're eating a terrible meal. We can't find a meal. We get food poisoning. It goes on and on, doesn't it? It's all part of what makes an adventure. An adventure is the ups and downs, right? It's if there's no ups and downs, it's not that much of an adventure. Right? So we need to keep raising this mind that brought us here in the first place. And one way to think of it is it's a mind of inquiry. It's a mind of investigation. We want to see or know or understand something deeply about our lives. And that's what we've come here for. Of course, if we're doing koan practice, that mind of investigation, that's one of the tricks of koan. It raises the mind of investigation automatically, right? We're assigned a question. In fact, oftentimes one that that seems impenetrable, right? And of course, those kinds of questions arise all the time in life, impenetrable questions, right? So it's not anything unusual, but we're applying that mind that wants to investigate, that wants to penetrate, and that's what koans do. But we can raise the same kind of mind no matter what kind of practice we're doing, right? If we're doing breath practice, for instance, there's so much we could notice if we just slow down, inspire ourselves, and get curious enough to penetrate below the surface. For instance, are we really feeling the breath physically in the body? Are we feeling it down somewhere near our center of gravity in the hara? If not, can we let it sink deeper? Are we feeling all the phases of the breath? Are we feeling them all equally, or is attention flickering in and out, flickering in and out? Are we half following the breath, half thinking about something else, or half snoozing? Do we know where the mind tends to drift in our breath cycle? I bet if we look closely, we'll find that it tends to drift at the same place often. For instance, mine will shift very often between the breaths, in the turning points between the breath. That's where my mind will go off, if it's going to go off. So once I start to notice that, I can start watching for that, right? I can start watching, oh, okay, here I am at the end of the inhale. This is where my mind will sail off if I don't keep, an eye on it. And so I can make that little bit of extra effort at that point to keep my attention continuous and watch for that distraction kind of headed off at the pass. I know this is nerdy. I call this being a breath nerd. But it's very valuable to be a breath nerd. I encourage it. So the trick is that the thinking mind thinks there's so many more important things to think about, right? So we have to get it interested. We have to get it to really get investigative with our practice, not intellectually, though. It's more like, I don't know, maybe I've been thinking lately, maybe we should change the name of meditation practice, because it just doesn't sound that exciting to the thinking mind. If we call it meditative adventure, or Zen inquiry, or Zen investigation, or meditative exploration, something like that. Something that where the thinking mind goes, oh yeah, I want to do that. I don't just want to practice, I want to do that. That's exciting. We have to kind of trick ourselves sometimes. So we want to raise that mind of inquiry, even in shikantaza, which is just sitting practice and allowing the ever-changing scenery of the mind to be our and mind and whole body experience and emotions to be the subject of our attention. Even there, I call what I do in shikantaza, just sitting practice, shikantaza with a question mark. I'm definitely interested in what I'm doing. It's as though, to go back to the metaphor of a travel adventure, if, say, we're on a train to Zurich, okay, that's our destination, right? But on the way, are we going to look out the window and be interested in the scenery, or are we going to be looking at our phone the whole time, right? So can we be interested in what's happening and engage, not in a grasping way? I mean, you're on the way to Zurich, you look out the window, there's a cow. You don't want to take the cow home with you, right? So it's a non-grasping interest. You just, oh, look at that. I want, and hmm, we could think of it as as a type of wonderment. This inquiry, this investigation. Um, it's not an inquiry with the mind, at least not primarily, although that may bring us to it. But when we get into it, it's a gut level inquiry. It's a felt sense inquiry. It's experiential. It's from the hara. There's a sense of, when it's really working, there's a sense of real engagement and even wonder. Mm, This kind of inquiry doesn't bring us 1 + 1 = 2 answers. It doesn't bring us those kind of mental answers that mental inquiry brings us. It's a deep entry into mystery. Sometimes the intuition will come up with a solution or an answer or a clarification, but it doesn't get there through logic, right? So, so we have to be willing to enter into the mystery. If you think about it, isn't when we hear Dogen, isn't he saying that all the time? Isn't he saying to his monks, you should deeply investigate this, or you should deeply inquire into this? I forget what the most common translation is. Um, but he'll bring up a point in one of his written talks and he'll say, you monks, you should look into this. This is what he's talking about. It's not just coasting along in samadhi. It's lovely to coast along in samadhi. um, it's one of the joys of practice, one of the joys of retreat. But there's more to it than that. If you think back to the story of the original Buddha, he mastered the levels of samadhi as they were known at that time. The whole samadhi system was already known at that time, just as it exists today in branches of meditative practice that think about things in terms of those levels. That's the way the yogic system he studied. I think there were 8 levels of samadhi in the original system he studied, if I'm remembering correctly. But he basically had mastered all levels of samadhi, and the people he learned it from, because he went to teachers to learn that, they said, well, that's it. You've done it. You should start teaching now. You're enlightened. He thought, oh, this feels good, the samadhi stuff. I like it, but it doesn't feel like the whole enchilada. Maybe they wouldn't have had enchiladas back there, but you know what I'm talking about. He still felt something was missing. So what he eventually got to, we know the story, was sitting down beneath the Bodhi tree, and he used that samadhi, but he used it to investigate this question of suffering, this deep question of human suffering that was provoked by seeing the sick person, the old person, and the dead person, right? And realizing, hey, I gotta know what the deal is here, right? I gotta know what this is about. So so it was samadhi plus that spirit of inquiry. And again, we can go back and revisit the story. It's been written many times, but the Buddha wasn't sitting there going, now suffering, what is suffering exactly? It wasn't going through an intellectual investigation. I'm sure he'd been over all that turf, just like when we're assigned a koan, we're going to go through the mental process, right? But it takes us to a place where we can't proceed that way anymore. And I think he was at that point with suffering. So he dug into it using that samadhi power to dig into the question. What he came up with was not an explanation for suffering, right? It's often said that the Buddha said when somebody shoots an arrow into you, you need to pull it out and you need the medicine for the arrow, right? You don't need to discuss and analyze where it came from, why it was shot, all of that, right? So the approach that we practice to suffering is not so much why it's there, where it came from, whose fault it is, but what do we do about it? Right? What do we do about this human situation? So this mind of inquiry we have to be willing to take it into all aspects of what comes up in our practice. Our whole life is going to appear to us on the cushion at some point or another. I've had the most glorious and among the most painful moments of my life in retreat. And just everything that faces us outside retreat will eventually face us in a retreat setting. So, are we interested in our lives? Are we interested in the whole of our life? Are we only interested in the parts we like? That's not going to work if we're only interested in the parts we like, right? We have to be interested in the whole thing. And that takes a raising of that interest, takes a raising of that spirit of inquiry. It takes engaging that part of the mind that wants to think things through, but it can't at this point, right? We have to be willing to just go to the depths. So if we're experiencing some kind of suffering, well, Yugen said it in his talk yesterday, didn't he? He said, he quoted Thich Nhat Hanh as saying, the problem isn't so much the suffering, it's wanting it to be different, right? And there's a Vipassana teacher, Sylvia Boorstein, put it away that I really like. She said, suffering is being at odds with life, or being at odds with what is, right? Of course, yes, if we have a headache, we might take an aspirin, okay? But, that's just natural, that we don't want to wallow in suffering. But sometimes it's just going to come and we can't get away from it. And don't we want to know how to deal with it? Don't we want to know what it is, what's going on there? For instance, physical pain, that's maybe the trickiest to get interested in, to get intrigued in. But if we really get to the point where we can't avoid physical pain, obviously, if we can let go of it and focus on our koan or another aspect of practice, sure. If it's minor pain, that's what we do. If it's major and we can't get away from it, well, what we need to do is turn towards it. We could examine things like, is pain continuous? Actually, you'll discover that if you really don't regard pain as just this wall that's coming in on you, but actually turn and approach and look at it, we'll find out it's made up of myriad smaller sensations. And between those sensations, there actually is some space. And actually in those smaller sensations, those are made up of even smaller sensations, and there's space between them. And if we can walk closer and closer, not in a big rush, not forcing ourselves in, but trying to encourage ourselves to say, hey, what's going on here? We'll find that there's actually moments where even in the midst of pain, where it's gone for a moment. And then sadly, it will start up again. But there's plenty of interesting things to find out about pain if we examine it. One of the things we often find, I have found a lot, is a lot of the suffering comes from resisting it, physically tightening against it. If I can get close enough to the pain to notice that I'm fighting it physically with tension, and can let go of that tension in the body, guess what? The pain gets easier to bear. In fact, sometimes it goes away altogether. I've definitely had that happen. Sometimes a lot of what's causing the pain is we're standing back from it, trying to get away from it. What if we just go into it? My first real primary teacher, Daido Roshi, used to always say, become the pain. Boy, did that ever piss me off. But it's very true. Sometimes I want to just say, you become the pain. But, he was speaking from his own experience. He had plenty of pain in his early practice. So can we get interested even in the areas of life we'd rather not be interested in? So those of you who know Nansen's koan about the cat, right? About how Nansen asked for a word of Zen, and he said, if none of you monks can speak a word of Zen, I'm going to cut this cat in half. And in the koan, nobody can speak a word of Zen, and so he actually cuts the cat in half. Now, you need to know that no cats were actually hurt in the making of this koan. Although some people say to really get the koan, you really have to imagine the cat has been killed. But anyway, my point is to just say none of the monks had enough of that spirit of inquiry. So in other words, it was lack of curiosity that killed Nonsense Cat, right? So we need that curiosity. So there's a part of our practice that often gets overlooked, and that's what I'm talking about in one way or another today. We all know that we need to sit, and we all know that it's good to experience samadhi. But you know, I've known people who are deep samadhi practitioners, but don't have a lot of realization. I'm sure those of you who have been around the Zen world for a long time know those, have encountered that too. They can go into samadhi like that, but it becomes kind of a hideout, you know? It becomes a kind of a nest, you know, where that they can retreat into, which is also called spiritual bypassing, of course. So samadhi is necessary for sure. And we also know that we have to hear the teachings or study the teachings, read the teachings. Somehow we need to take in some of the theory that goes with this, some of the, you know, at least some of the original teachings of Buddhism, some of the teachings of Zen, so that we know how to conduct ourselves in our practice. But the part that gets overlooked a lot is the third part of it. It's contemplation, or it's what I've been talking about, inquiry, or what Dogen calls examine. You all should examine this closely. So it's not just like you listen to Dogen, you go and sit, and magically this alchemy happens. You know, this is one of my notions of what the difference is between people who sometimes really transform their lives through this practice and others who don't seem to progress beyond a certain point. We need to make time to wonder, not when we're sitting on the cushion, we're not going through a thought process like that. Or if we are bringing thought in, it's just to take us to the edge of practice. For instance, we might hear something in the talk about emptiness, and we might ask ourselves, what's meant by that? Is that what I'm experiencing in my zazen? Well, I guess I'll take a look, you know. Or we'll hear about no self, non-self. You know, what can I discover about that? What do they mean by that? If I look into my practice, it sure seems like I'm here. Maybe they mean something else. What could they mean? We don't keep that thought process going, but it might take us to the brink of practice, and then we go and investigate for ourselves. In fact, investigating for ourselves is a lot of the reason many of us came to Zen practice, because that's allowed. We're allowed to question. We're allowed to investigate. In working with Shishin Roshi, sometimes there have been times he and I both talked over a koan, and we just thought, I don't think so, you know. You know, it's like, I got a problem with the point of this koan, Roshi. Does this really apply in the 21st century? And every once in a great while, he'd say, you know, I don't think so either. Let's skip that one, you know. I mean, maybe it's happened twice, right? So you're not going to get away with skipping a lot of koans. Don't get too excited. But you're allowed to question, right? You're allowed to ask. You're allowed to say, why is that koan here? What's it communicating? What's it, you know, is this something that still applies to us, or was it made up for 10th century China, and it doesn't, you know, it's not as relevant to us. You're allowed to ask those kind of questions. Why do we do this? So, of course, contemplation is dangerous, because if we let ourselves get too far into it, the next thing we know, we're thinking again, and that's not the point, right? But if we think about it, all the theory that we hear, everything that's communicated to us in our talks, all the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, and all the other 5 thises and the 8 that's and the 9 misses that are all through Buddhism, they're all forms of thought. They're all theory, right? We're meant to take them and put them into practice. There's Here's an example about the difference between trying to get to something through thought and actually putting it into practice. Some of you, I know Sheesh and Roshi will know this one, but some of you may have heard of this. This, what is it? It's a mathematical proof. It's called Zeno's paradox, and Zeno's paradox proves that you can never actually get anywhere, and they can prove this mathematically. And the way it goes is that in order to say get to the door of this room, I have to go halfway first, right? Everyone could agree, of course, you have to go halfway. Well, then to go the rest of the distance, I have to go halfway again, don't I? Well, yes, you have to go halfway again. And then the remaining distance, I'll have to go halfway again. Yeah, everyone can agree that, right? Well, it turns out that halfway is infinitely subdividable. So into infinity, there's always another halfway, and you can never, mathematically speaking, you can prove that you can never actually reach the door. Now, if that was assigned to us as a koan, what would we do? We think it over, we think it over, and we think it over, and then we'd forget about thinking it over, and then we'd just sit with it, and then we'd be in Doksan, and we'd realize, oh, just go open the friggin' door, you know? That's the difference between action and thought, right? You can prove to yourself through thought that you can never get to the door, but just walk over and open it, right? So all these things we hear and the contemplation that we do between times, we weigh it against practice and we put it into practice. So we need to be creative about our practice. We hear a lot that there's no bad zazen, and that's absolutely true. But there's bad zazen. And if our practice hasn't been working for some time, we really need to face up to that and find something that will work. That's the point where we make the practice our own, where we really bring ourselves to it. Zen practice can look so structured on the outside, but inside, who knows what people are doing? Everybody's got their own approaches to things. I've talked to a lot of people about how they approach koans, and I know there's many, many different ways that people, just for instance, take on koan practice and are successful at it. And they don't have to do it the way the next person does it, right? We have to find our own ways through. We're all different. So, yeah, this is tricky. It can be hard to tell what's working and what isn't. Sometimes we keep trying the same thing in our practice and it's not working, it's not working, it's not working, and then, oop, it works, you know? And then sometimes we keep trying, we keep trying, we keep trying, and we're just banging our heads against the wall, right? It's hard to bring that creative mind into difficult moments on the cushion, but that's exactly what we need to do, because that's exactly what we need to do in our daily lives, and that's the whole point, isn't it? Taking the practice off the cushion. So we have to be willing to not fool ourselves, and that can be tricky to know because we all fool ourselves, right? Am I really practicing, putting myself into my practice the best I can, or am I kind of coasting along and just waiting for it to be over? It can be hard to know. It can be surprisingly hard to know. But we have to be willing to look. We have to be willing to investigate. Not just the principles of practice and the principles of Buddhism, but we have to be willing to look at ourselves and look at our own practice and ask ourselves these questions. One thing that's happened to me sometimes, occasionally I go to another Zen center and give a talk, and I'll often talk about creativity and practice and making practice one's own. And it has not been an uncommon experience that someone will come up to me afterwards and say, boy, I really appreciated your talk. You know, my teacher died 20 years ago, and the last thing he told me was I should count the breath. And so I've been counting the breath ever since. And I just think, oh God, it's great that your teacher told you to count the breath 20 years ago, but at some point, your teacher's gone. Your your teacher is you, or find a different teacher. But some way, don't be stuck in that same repetitive method. And oftentimes, well, I don't think you can count the practice for 20 years and not have your practice go dead. It's going to go dead. So if you've been doing it for 20 years, time to move on, right? Um, it's sometimes people are so rule bound that they're counting the breath, doing the practice, whatever. It's another practice. It doesn't matter what practice. They're doing the practice. They're doing the practice. The whole ineffable oneness of all reality opens up right over here, almost before their eyes, and they're like, no, no, I'm counting the breath. I'm counting the breath. No, if the whole ineffable oneness of all reality opens up over here, that's where you go, right? You have to be willing to trust yourself. Again, Dado Roshi used to always say, deeply trust yourself. But it's tricky to know which self, right? You have to trust your deepest self. Mm. You have to get to that core bottom of yourself and then even let that go. So it's a mistake, though, to assume that more effort is what's always needed to do the trick if your practice has become a slog, or if it's gone kind of dead, or if you can't raise that engagement with it. Sometimes the opposite is what's needed. Sometimes letting go of the effort is what's needed. Again, this is fooling yourself easily territory, right? We have to really ask ourselves what's going on here and be willing to experiment, willing to get it wrong. The Dogen quote, practice can be one continuous mistake, it can be a lifetime of mistakes. That's one way to look at practice. We have to be entirely willing to get it wrong in order to figure out how to get it right. So I remember there was one session where I was having a lot of trouble with sleep, and just falling asleep, falling asleep, falling asleep. It's a common issue for me, actually. Um, and so I was really working intensely with the breath, really working with the breath, really working with the breath, letting everything else go, just coming back, um, taking full inhales, full exhales, full inhales, full exhales. For a couple of days, I had to practice like that just to get out of that fatigue slump. It worked really well. Maybe it was the third day. I was pretty much out of the fatigue slump, but I was still practicing the same way just because that's what I was doing. And Shishin Roshi gave a talk, and in the talk, I don't remember the rest of it, but at some point in the talk, he said, "This is a letting go practice." And I thought, yeah, sure enough, that's what I've been doing, letting go of everything except the breath, letting it go, coming back to letting it go, letting it go. But then it occurred to me, like, so, well, maybe I'll let go of the breath. And sure enough, I was in a meditative state. I was in samadhi without having to grip the breath, and I wasn't falling asleep. And the talk went on, and I thought, well, that's interesting. Am I even doing anything? I don't know if I'm doing anything, but here I am. I'm listening to the talk, I'm taking everything in. And I think Roshi repeated again. So you have to let go of everything. And the thought arose in my head, well, I've already let go of everything. What else is there to let go of? And I thought, oh, maybe I let go of letting go. And at that point, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this, practice became effortless. So I made all that effort, all that effort, all that effort, and then released the effort. And that turned out to be a very profound session for me because all sorts of new ground opened up. If you've really ever hit that effortless point in practice, part of what you see is that to pick up the next train of thought would take effort. Staying just with your direct experience, when you're really in it, doesn't necessarily take effort. Right? That's the way animals live. That's the way children live up to a certain point. A child doesn't need to raise effort to be engaged. Have you ever Have you ever had that brand of engagement? Of course you have at some point, maybe even recently. It's the kind of engagement where you're drawn in, you're so fascinated by what you're doing or what you're experiencing that it doesn't take any effort to bring your mind there. It's as though it's drawn in by gravity, or like, in the old Star Trek movies, they have those tractor beams that just pull you in. There's an aspect of our practice that will do that if we let it happen. It's not always going to work. It's a nebulous point to find. One thing I can suggest, though, is, well, let me say first, we have to find, there's a balance between efforting and letting go, right? We've heard that a lot, effortless effort. So one place we could maybe look for this place of stillness without effort or absorption without effort is at the very end of, those of you who've been doing the stretching practice with me know that I'm always going on about how the relaxation part of the breath is the exhale. If you tap into that relaxation, it'll go further. If you tap into the exhale and appreciate the relaxation, it'll happen yet more. We're connecting with something that's normal, that's already happening. And in our practice, if we look at the very, very end of the exhale, sometimes there's a moment of just pure stillness. Sometimes we'll find a moment of pure stillness right in that turning point before the inhale starts. You might find it somewhere else in the breath. That's just a common place where people find it. It's before the doing of the next inhale has started. There's this moment where mind, body, emotions, for a moment, might seem to become still. Sometimes we call that the still point. When we touch the still point, what would it take to just stay there? What would it take to stay with that stillness? Maybe that would take less effort than fighting to get back there, right? When we have to not be afraid of the pleasure that comes with that stillness. It's a pleasant feeling. At first, it's quietly pleasant. It can later become very, very deeply pleasant. But at first, it's like the pleasant feeling of sipping a cup of nice tea. It's not ecstasy, but it's pleasant. Can we let ourselves find that momentary gap within ourselves where everything stops and just situate our attention there? And then gently see, just like we try and remain relaxed when we feel our shoulders starting to rise and the tension creeps in. What if we just go, let's not do that. Let's just stay here. Is that possible? It's a strong motivation not to grab onto the next thought that sails through if we're really in the stillness. And it's not just enjoyment, it can feel profound. Of course, samadhi is all about stillness. There's levels and levels and levels of stillness, but that's an entry point to it. That's certainly an entry point to it. It's also an entry point to no self, because where's the self when we're just perfectly still? That's another thing I've heard Shishin Roshi say one time in a talk, which was very pivotal to me. When you're in samadhi and the mind is not active, we don't know how old we are. We don't know what our gender is. We don't know what century we live in. We don't know what language we speak. We don't know what we do for a living. We don't know what color our hair is, how tall we are, what our state of health is, what our state of illness is. We don't know a thing, right? We're just in awareness. And the other place you can look for that open space sometimes is between thoughts. People will say, my mind is filled with thoughts. And I'll say, well, what's between the thoughts? And they'll say, well, there's nothing between, there's no between. It's just, there's just rumbling of thoughts. It's just endless. And I'll say, well, how do you know it's thoughts then? If there was really no space, wouldn't it just be thought? There's just one, right? If there's one thought and another thought, there must be the tiniest glimmer of space. It's like, we say trains of thought. Isn't that funny? If you watch a train going really fast, there's a car, a gap, a car, a gap, a car, a gap. There's that little gap of light, even between our thoughts, even when they're running at train speed. Maybe we can find that little gap of, of light, right? Put our attention there instead of on the thought. We actually have a choice. We can put our attention on the empty space or on the thought. The more we make that choice, the more we have that choice. So a balanced effort is less like grasping. It's more like not letting it slip through the hands. So we touch that moment of stillness and we're so prone to let it slip away. We're so prone to just let it go. What can we do to just, can we make the choice to just stay there? Oh, it's so tempting to run with that next thought, isn't it? But we know that that's just going to wreck it. Being with the stillness, there's a pleasant quality to it. Chasing the thought, it's just exhausting from that standpoint, right? So from a Zen standpoint, I guess we could say it's a not doing state, but it's at the same time, it's not doing. How's that for Zen double talk? There's something subtle that we're engaging with that's not an active doing, but something's happening nonetheless, and we're in it. It's so hard to let go of doing and to think practice is something that we have to do. Actually, a lot of the doing is getting out of the way and just letting it happen, just letting that stillness draw us in. That if we could just stay with that stillness, it will draw us in and in and in and in. That same kind of fascination that we had for whatever activity we may remember that was like that, playing music, riding horseback, dancing, some activity that just drew us deeper and deeper and deeper. Our practice will do that too. We just have to get interested enough. I had a friend when I was 13, 14 years old, over the summer, over one of those summers, I had one of those summers in adolescence where I grew like 5 inches in a summer. And all of a sudden I was 5 inches taller than my friend, and he was so envious, my best friend, Brian Henry. And it just didn't happen to him that summer. And he was just going to have to wait, right? The universe had its own idea about when it should grow him. And meanwhile, he looked like a little kid, and all of a sudden I looked adolescent. So he went around, he made up his own stretching practice. Every time we'd be on a bus, he'd hang from the standing bar on the bus. Anytime we'd walk past a tree, he'd hang from the limb. He was trying to stretch his body, trying to make himself tall. Of course, he didn't make himself any taller, did he? It can't be done that way. The universe knew how to grow his bones in the first place. They'll know how to make him taller when it's time, or not, or develop him in some other way. It knew how to grow our bones. It knew how to grow our body. It knew how to grow us from a single cell. So it knows how to grow us spiritually too. But we have to get the self out of the way. We have to get. So, yeah, I feel like I really am double talking here. We really have to put ourselves into the practice, but it's not a matter of strain. It's not a matter of grasping. It's doing through non-doing is the best way that I can say it. It's putting ourselves in as much as we can with as little strain and as little effort as we can manage. And a lot of what makes it difficult for us is that excess strain and effort. So we also have to be willing to give up what we think we know about practice and maybe what worked last time. One of the things that I discovered about practice, which was surprising to me, at the beginning of practice, we all work on being able to breathe from the belly and put our attention in the hara and develop that diaphragmatic breathing, deeper breathing, longer breathing. What I discovered is that in samadhi states, oftentimes the breath becomes very subtle, even shallow, if we just let it do so. And when that first happened, I would tend to work against it. I would tend to try and deepen it. But I discovered that that actually kept me at a certain level. It didn't let me drop. You know, when you hear those stories about yogis in India who wouldn't breathe for 24 hours, um, in the yoga style that I've practiced, Ashtanga, there was a famous master named Krishnamacharya who could not breathe for 24 hours and who could stop his heart at will, it was said. And this was back around the time just before and after India got independence. And at a certain point, medical equipment became portable enough that they asked him, hey, could we measure this? It sure seems like you've stopped your heart and like you're not breathing. And, you know, he wanted honesty. So he said, sure, let's figure this out. And sure enough, they hooked him up to monitors and they found that his, even when he thought the heart was stopped, it was very, very, very subtly beating. And when it didn't seem like he was breathing, he was taking just tiny, tiny bit of air. He was in such a deep samadhi state that there was very little required from his heart or lungs, and it wasn't visible at all from the outside. It was measurable, though. So it wasn't like he wasn't breathing. It's that, it's a bit like a hibernation state for animals, right? Everything, respiration goes down, circulation goes down. You know, it's not as passive as that, of course, in samadhi, but we're in this deep state that's self-maintaining. It doesn't require a lot. So in closing, even our suffering, we need to come to appreciate as a miracle. I mean, what are the chances that Soen Nakagawa, a famous early Roshi who came to the United States, he used to always say, what are the chances one sperm touches one ovum and makes you, what great good fortune. What are the chances against it? 1,000,000 sperm, 1,000,000 eggs, and here you are. Don't waste it. Don't see the miracle and don't waste it. So we have to not fool ourselves. You know, if we're working with that effort level, we still have to watch for not drifting into daydreaming, not drifting into sleepy fuzziness, not wasting our time. If we're sleepy, we investigate sleep. If we're bored, we investigate boredom. If we're too tired to make an effort, we investigate what is effort? Where does it come from? If it's pleasure, we enjoy the pleasure without grasping. We have to find new ways of looking at our practice, new ways to invigorate it. It's funny, we clear our time for this, we pay some money for this, we go short on sleep to do this, and it could be so easy for us to just let go of our engagement with it. And what a shame. Let's use this time. Zen's a practice we came to because we find out for ourselves. And so we have to not forget we're on a great adventure. Even when we have dysentery, even when we've missed the plane, right? It's still the adventure, and there's more to come. We need to believe in our deep, true nature. Our innate wisdom is what we're practicing with. If we have doubt sometimes in our small self, that's natural and it's okay. And it's true in a way because our small self isn't the real self, right? So, what am I saying? I guess don't worry, be happy, practice hard, and enjoy the rest of your session. Thank you.